The champagne was still fizzing in my glass when I saw it. A video on my son-in-law's phone of a man standing in a scorched vineyard. My face, my exact face, but weathered by decades of sun I had never worked under. His hands were calloused. His eyes carried a grief I could not name. When Brett saw me looking, he went white. "Henry, please. Not tonight." That night, I started digging. What I found nearly buried me. Hello everyone, and thank you for being here today. If this story resonates with you, I would truly appreciate a like and a subscription to keep this channel growing. I am also curious, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Before we begin, a quick note. What you are about to hear blends creative storytelling with purposeful lessons designed to both engage and inspire. Any similarities to specific individuals or locations are entirely unintentional. What matters most is the wisdom woven throughout, and I hope it stays with you long after the video ends. The candlelight moved slowly across the stone walls of our wine cellar, casting golden shadows over bottles older than my marriage. It was New Year's Eve. Around the long oak table sat the people I loved most. Catherine, my eldest at 41, arranged cheese on the wooden board Grace had carved by hand 20 years ago. She moved with the same deliberate precision she brought to managing our vineyards. Beside her sat Brett Sullivan, her husband of 12 years and our operations manager. Normally, Brett was the easiest person in any room. Quick laugh, firm handshake. The kind of man who remembered every worker's name. Tonight, he sat rigid. His knee bounced beneath the table. His fingers kept drifting toward the phone beside his wine glass. I noticed because noticing was what I did. 40 years in the wine business teaches you to read people the way you read soil. Subtle shifts in texture, in temperature, in what lies beneath the surface. Lily, my youngest at 35, sat across from them. She had driven up from Portland that morning with overnight bags and a manuscript she was editing. She had her mother's eyes, that steady gaze that held you accountable without a word. She watched Brett quietly, completely, missing nothing. 5 years had passed since Grace died. Alzheimer's took her mind first, then her body. But in this cellar, she was everywhere. The lavender she planted outside the door still scented the evening air. The handwritten labels on our oldest reserves were in her careful script. The empty chair at the head of the table was hers. I never let anyone else sit there. I poured a glass of our 2004 Reserve Cabernet, the vintage Grace and I made the year Catherine graduated college. Deep garnet, almost black at the center, with an aroma of dark cherries and cedar and something earthier underneath, something that smelled like the land itself remembering. To another year, I said, raising my glass. To family. To the vines. To everything that matters. Catherine smiled. Lily raised her glass. Brett reached for his, but his phone buzzed, and his hand jerked toward it instead. He caught himself, picked up the wine, clinked glasses a half-second late. Nobody else noticed. I did. Dinner moved the way family dinners do when the surface is calm, but the current underneath runs uncertain. Catherine discussed the spring barrel tasting she was planning. Lily shared stories from Portland, a hike along the Columbia River that reminded her of walking our vineyards as a girl. Pleasant rhythms. Familiar warmth. But Brett's phone kept lighting up. He had left it face up on the table, which was unusual. Grace had insisted on phones away during meals, and we carried that rule forward as a quiet tribute. Tonight the screen flashed every few minutes, and each time Brett's jaw tightened imperceptibly. I was reaching for the breadbasket. That was all. My hand passed near his phone when the screen illuminated with a video thumbnail. A still frame of a man standing in a vineyard. Not our vineyard. The vines behind him were dead, scorched brown. Posts tilting at broken angles under a punishing sky. The man faced the camera directly. My hand froze. The face on that screen was mine. The same jaw. The same cheekbones my mother gave me, high and slightly uneven. The same gray eyes, but the skin was darker, sun-damaged, in a way only decades of outdoor labor could produce. Deep creases ran from nose to mouth, carved not by age alone but by wind and dust and unrelenting heat. His hands at his sides were thick and scarred. Working hands, hands that had never held a wine glass at a candlelit table. The cellar seemed to tilt. Candle flames blurred. Catherine's voice continued somewhere nearby, muffled, as if the stone walls had thickened around me. Brett saw me looking. Color drained from his face so fast I thought he might collapse. He snatched the phone and pressed it against his chest, like something forbidden. "Henry." Barely a whisper. "Please." "Not tonight." The table went quiet. Catherine stopped mid-sentence. Lily set down her glass and looked between us, something shifting behind her eyes. Not recognition of the face, recognition of the fear. What was that? My voice was calm. 40 years of negotiations taught me that calm was a weapon. Nothing. Brett forced a smile that crumbled at the edges. "Work thing. I will explain later." He would not. I could tell from his trembling hand, from the way he could not hold my gaze longer than a second. Whatever lived on that screen was the kind of secret that changes the shape of a room. Dinner dissolved. Brett barely touched his plate. Catherine tried bright conversation about New Year's resolutions, but her voice carried a brittle edge. Lily helped me clear dishes, leaning close enough to murmur, "Dad, something is wrong with Brett." I nodded once and said nothing. They left just before 11. Brett hurried Catherine toward the car, movements tight and urgent. She kept glancing back at me standing in the doorway, something like confusion or the early edge of fear in her expression. Lily lingered beside me on the stone patio, watching their taillights descend through the vineyard toward Silverado Trail. Fog had rolled in thick and low, swallowing the valley floor. The bare winter vines stood in rows like silent witnesses against the white mist. "You saw something on his phone," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "What was it?" I stared into the fog where the driveway had vanished. 40 years building this estate. Grace beside me for 35 of them. "A face," I said. "My face." "On someone I have never met." Lily squeezed my arm and walked to her car without another word. She knew I would not sleep tonight. Questions like this never waited until morning. The fog took her taillights too. I stood alone. 73 years old. Builder of one of Napa's most respected estates. Widower. Father. A man who believed he understood his own life. Somewhere past the fog and the sleeping vines, someone who wore my face was standing in a dead vineyard. And my son-in-law knew exactly who he was. Inside, the candles had burned to nothing. I locked the door and stopped before Grace's portrait near the staircase, painted the year we completed our first harvest. She looked at me with steady eyes, as if asking what I planned to do next. I did not have an answer. But I would. Because in my experience, secrets buried in soil had a way of growing, whether you wanted them to or not. Sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, that face flickered behind my eyelids. My face, worn by a life I had never lived, staring out from a dead vineyard on my son-in-law's phone. At midnight, the fireworks began. Distant pops and crackles from the estates down valley, muffled by fog. The new year arriving while my old certainties crumbled. I gave up on rest and made my way downstairs to the study. This had been Grace's room before it was mine. Her oak desk still anchored the far wall beneath the window that overlooked the eastern vineyard blocks. Her reading glasses sat in the top drawer where she left them the last time her mind was clear enough to use them. I had not moved them. Moving them felt like admitting she was truly gone. I opened my laptop and the blue light cut through the dark room. My filing system was precise. Every document cataloged. Every folder labeled in the same format I had used for 4 decades. Grace used to tease me about it. "You organize files the way other men organize golf clubs," she would say. Obsessively and without apology. That precision was why the anomaly screamed at me. A folder I had never created sat between estate tax planning and equipment maintenance. It was labeled Estate Restructuring, Urgent. The date stamp showed it had been added 11 days ago, December 20th. I had been in Sonoma that entire week, meeting with a cooperage supplier. Brett had been here, running the estate in my absence, as he always did. My cursor hovered over the folder. Part of me understood that opening it would change things in ways I could not predict. But I had spent my life opening doors others left closed. That was how you built something from bare soil. I clicked. The first document was a scanned image, yellowed with age, edges soft from decades of handling. An adoption certificate dated June 14, 1960. The state of California, county of Napa. It recorded the legal adoption of one Henry James Ashford, formerly Henry James Dawson, age 8, by Robert and Eleanor Ashford of Silverado Trail, Napa Valley. I knew this document. A copy lived in my safe deposit box at First Republic Bank in St. Helena, but I had never digitized it. I had never uploaded it to any system. The second document stopped my breathing. Another adoption record. Same date. Same county. Same biological parents. James and Margaret Dawson. But a different child. William Thomas Dawson, age 8. Twin brother. Adopted by the Duarte family of Bakersfield, Kern County. Twin brother. I read it 3 times. The words did not change. William Thomas Dawson. My twin. Separated the same day I became an Ashford. Sent 400 miles south to Bakersfield, while I stayed in Napa Valley. My hands had begun shaking. I pressed them flat against the desk and kept reading. The third document was worse. A property transfer clause embedded in the original Ashford adoption agreement, a clause I had never seen in my own copy. Section 7, Paragraph 3. In consideration of the biological family's cooperation, the Ashford estate agrees that both biological sons of James and Margaret Dawson shall retain equal inheritance rights to all Ashford family landholdings upon reaching the age of majority. Equal inheritance rights. Both sons. Written into law. 65 years ago. The fourth document made the room spin. A draft civil complaint, prepared but not yet filed, seeking declaratory judgment that one William Thomas Duarte, formerly William Thomas Dawson, held legal claim to 50% of Ashford estate vineyards, all improvements, structures, and commercial operations therein. 50%. 400 acres. Half the cellar. Half the label. Half of everything Grace and I had built over 40 years. I grabbed my phone with fingers that would not stay steady. Maggie Tran. She had been my attorney for 18 years. Sharp, relentless, the kind of lawyer who read contracts the way surgeons read scans, looking for what would kill you. She answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep. Henry. It is after midnight. Maggie. I need you here. Now. Something in my voice must have cut through because she did not argue. 30 minutes, she said, and hung up. She arrived in 27. Still in the silk blouse from whatever New Year's party she had left, heels kicked off at my front door, briefcase in hand like a weapon. She sat at Grace's desk without ceremony and began reading. I watched her face. Maggie had spent 2 decades mastering the art of courtroom neutrality, but I knew her tells. The slight tightening around her eyes. The way she pressed her thumbnail into her index finger when something alarmed her. She pressed hard tonight. The adoption records are authentic, she said finally. State seals, period-appropriate formatting, consistent with Napa County archives from that era. She pulled up the property clause and read it twice. This inheritance provision, Henry, if it was part of the original adoption agreement and was never formally revoked, it could be legally enforceable. Could be? Would need verification against the county's original filing. But the language is clear. Both biological sons, equal inheritance rights. No expiration clause. No revocation on record. She looked at me, and behind her professional composure I saw something raw. Henry, If this holds up in court, half of everything you built might legally belong to someone else. The words landed in the quiet room like stones dropped into still water. Circles spreading outward, touching everything. Someone has been preparing this, I said. The folder was planted in my system 11 days ago. While I was in Sonoma, while Brett was here. Maggie finished. Her eyes narrowed. We need to talk to him. But, carefully. If he is cooperating with whoever is behind this, we do not want to spook him into destroying evidence. Through the window, the first gray light of New Year's morning crept across the vineyard. The vines stood in their winter rows, bare and patient, the way they always stood between harvest and spring, waiting for warmth, waiting for growth, unaware that the ground beneath them was now contested. I stared at the screen. The draft complaint. 50%. A name I had never known. William Thomas Duarte. A brother I had never met. A legal claim that predated everything I had built. My hands did not stop shaking until dawn. Not because someone was stealing from me, but because, according to a document signed 65 years ago, they might not be stealing at all. Maggie left at dawn with instructions sharp enough to cut glass. Do not confront Brett alone. Do not contact anyone named in the documents. Do not touch the folder again until she had verified the originals with Napa County records. I intended to follow every instruction. But when the doorbell rang at 8:30 that New Year's morning, intention dissolved like frost under California sun. Brett stood on my front step. Alone. No Catherine beside him. No hopeful wave from my daughter trying to smooth things over. Just Brett in yesterday's wrinkled dress shirt. Dark circles bruising his eyes. Hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, the way men stand when they are trying to hold themselves together. He looked like he had not slept either. I opened the door, but did not step aside. Let him stand in the morning cold. Let him feel the weight of the threshold he was about to cross. Can we talk? His voice was hoarse. Please. I stepped back just enough to let him into the foyer. No further. He stood on the terracotta tiles while I remained near the door. Power positioning. I had spent 40 years learning how space and silence worked in negotiations. This was another negotiation. The stakes just happened to be my life. I made a terrible mistake, he said. I said nothing. In business, the first person to fill silence usually reveals more than they intend. It started 8 months ago. He rushed the words out like a man pulling off a bandage. Fresno Ag Expo last May. I was walking the equipment floor when I saw him across the aisle. A man who looked exactly like you. Same height. Same build. Same way you stand with your hands in your pockets. Brett studied my face for a reaction. I gave him stone. I almost called your name. But Catherine had said you were in St. Helena that weekend meeting with the barrel supplier. So I walked 73 years old. Lived in a trailer park outside Bakersfield. Worked agricultural fields his entire life. Picking grapes, driving tractors, pruning vines for other men's labels. The irony was not lost on me. While I owned 800 acres of premium Napa vineyard, my twin brother had spent his life laboring in other people's dirt. He told me about being separated from a twin brother when he was 8. Brett continued. Adopted by a family in Bakersfield, while his brother went to a wealthy estate in Napa, he had spent decades wondering what happened to you. He was not bitter at first, just sad. Tired. A man at the end of things. And his daughter? I asked. First words I had spoken since letting him in. Brett flinched. Rosa. 28. Went to UC Davis on scholarship. Agricultural science. Brilliant. Dropped out her junior year when William got sick. Sick how? Skin cancer. Stage 4. Metastasized. Brett's voice thinned. Squamous cell carcinoma. Decades of working under open sun without proper protection. The doctors give him 2 to 4 months. The words settled over me like the fog that blanketed our valley at night. My twin brother, separated at 8, lost for 65 years, was dying from the very sun that had ripened the grapes, making me wealthy. The same California light that poured through my cellar windows and turned our Cabernet to liquid gold had been slowly killing him in fields 400 miles south. Rosa approached me a week after the expo. Brett said. She had done her research. She knew who I was, who you were, what Ashford Estate was worth. She showed me the adoption records, the inheritance clause. She said all they wanted was what was legally owed. And you believed her. She made it sound reasonable, like justice. He could not meet my eyes. William had nothing, Henry. A trailer with a leaking roof, medical bills that would outlive him. Meanwhile, you had 800 acres and a cellar full of wine worth more than everything he had earned in 73 years combined. So you gave her access. The silence stretched between us. Outside, a mockingbird called from the old oak tree near the cellar entrance. Grace had loved that bird. She said its song changed with the seasons, always adapting, always finding new melodies from borrowed notes. I copied files during the harvest dinner in October. Brett said quietly. You were in the cellar doing barrel samples. I went into the study, photographed financial records, distribution contracts, tax documents, the property map with parcel boundaries. He paused. Rosa said, You would never know. 40 years I had built Ashford Estate on trust. The trust of distributors who shipped our wine across the country. The trust of restaurant sommeliers who staked their reputations on our label. The trust of my family. While I had been drawing Cabernet samples from French oak barrels, my son-in-law was upstairs photographing the architecture of my life. How much? I asked. What? How much were they paying you? Nothing. His eyes widened. I swear, I was not in it for money. I just wanted to help a dying man get what was fair. The lie sat between us. I could see its shape in the way his gaze slid sideways, in the slight tremor of his lower lip. He was lying about the money. But that revelation could wait. Right now I needed information more than I needed the satisfaction of pinning him to the wall. William, I said. Does he know you are here? No. Rosa handles everything. William is too sick to be involved in strategy. Most days, he barely leaves his trailer. And what does he want? Not Rosa. Him. Brett paused. Something genuine flickered across his face. I think he just wants to be acknowledged. To know his brother knows he exists. To not die invisible. The mockingbird sang again. 3 notes, repeated. I thought of a boy I had never known, riding away from me in a stranger's car 65 years ago, while I rode in the opposite direction toward privilege and possibility. I thought of him growing up in Bakersfield dust, picking fruit under a sun that would eventually kill him, marrying a woman, losing her, raising a daughter who turned out brilliant enough for UC Davis and desperate enough to steal. Get out, I said quietly. Go home to Catherine. Figure out how you are going to tell her, because she will find out. Brett nodded, pale and diminished. At the door, he paused. For what it is worth, I do not think William wanted any of this to go so far. Rosa is driving it. He just wants her taken care of before he is gone. I did not answer. I watched him walk to his car in the pale morning light. The vineyard stretched behind him in perfect rows, vines still dormant, soil dark and damp from the night's fog. He looked small against all that land. My twin brother, separated at 8, dying under the same California sun that had made me wealthy. And my son-in-law had handed his daughter the keys to everything I had built. I closed the door and leaned against it. Somewhere in Bakersfield, in a leaking trailer surrounded by someone else's fields, a man with my face was counting his remaining days. He had spent 65 years growing grapes for other men's wine. Now his daughter was trying to claim the vineyard that should have been his. And the worst part, the part that made my chest ache in a way I had not felt since Grace's funeral, was that I was not entirely sure she was wrong. I had barely finished my second coffee when Elena Vega walked through my office door without knocking. In 18 years of managing Ashford Estates operations, Elena had never entered a room without knocking first. She was precise that way, meticulous about protocol, about chain of command, about the small courtesies that kept a business running smoothly. So when she pushed the door open with her laptop already open and her face drained of color, I knew something fundamental had broken. "They have been inside our system for 6 months," she said. She set the laptop on my desk and turned it toward me. Columns of data filled the screen. File access logs, download timestamps, transfer records stretching back to early July. 6 months. Not the 11 days since the folder appeared. 6 months of someone moving through our digital architecture like a ghost through hallways. "Brett's credentials," Elena said, pointing to a highlighted line. His login was used to access and copy files, beginning July 8th. Harvest projections first, then financial statements, then distribution contracts. She scrolled down. The list grew longer with each swipe. Tax filings, insurance valuations, payroll records, client databases, the Bordeaux Import Exclusivity Agreement, the Pacific Wine Collective Partnership terms, even the private tasting allocations for our reserve list members. She looked at me, and in her dark eyes, I saw something I had rarely seen from Elena. Fear. "How bad?" I asked, though I already sensed the answer. "If any of this reaches our distributors or competitors, we lose positioning that took decades to build. Bordeaux Import gave us exclusive West Coast rights because they trusted our discretion. Pacific Wine Collective negotiated terms based on confidential yield data. If those numbers become public, every competitor in the valley will know exactly how to undercut us." She pulled up another screen. Financial modeling. Projected losses under various exposure scenarios. Best case. Selective leak. We lose Bordeaux Import and 2 restaurant groups. Revenue drops 18%. Worst case, full exposure. Bordeaux pulls exclusivity. Pacific renegotiates. The Michelin restaurant network cancels spring allocations. That is 60% of our revenue gone overnight. 60%. I leaned back in my chair and stared through the window at the eastern vineyard blocks. The morning sun had burned off the fog, and the vines stood in their winter dormancy, rows stretching toward the Mayakama's ridgeline in perfect parallel lines. 800 acres, planted vine by vine over 4 decades. The first block, Grace and I had put in the ground ourselves. Just the 2 of us, and a borrowed tractor. The spring after our wedding. I remembered those early years with a clarity that surprised me. The bank loan at 14% interest that nearly destroyed us before our first vintage. The frost in '87 that killed half our Chardonnay and taught me that nature did not negotiate. The afternoon Grace came running from the cellar, holding a glass of our first estate Cabernet, tears streaming down her face because she could taste what we had built. "It tastes like us," she had said. "Like everything we have been through. 40 years of that. 40 years of reading weather patterns and soil reports, of courting distributors and earning trust one handshake at a time, of building a reputation so solid that sommeliers across the country put Ashford on their lists without tasting first, because the name alone guaranteed quality. And now someone had photographed the blueprints. "What about the property records?" I asked. "The parcel maps, boundary surveys, water rights documentation?" Elena nodded grimly. "All accessed. All copied. Whoever is behind this knows exactly what Ashford Estate owns, what it earns, what it owes, and where it is vulnerable. Not whoever," I said quietly. "My son-in-law." Elena's expression did not change, but her hand tightened on the edge of the laptop. She had worked alongside Brett for 8 years. Trusted him with operational decisions, staffing, equipment purchases. He had been part of the fabric of this place. "There may be more," she said carefully. "Some of the access patterns suggest files were not just copied but forwarded. External email addresses I do not recognize. Encrypted transfers to cloud storage accounts that are not ours. Rosa. Brilliant enough for UC Davis. Driven enough to drop out and wage war on my empire. Methodical enough to spend 6 months quietly cataloging every vulnerability in my life before making a single move. Lock everything down, I said. Change every password, revoke Brett's access, bring in outside security if you need to. I want to know every file that was touched and every destination it was sent to. Elena nodded and stood. At the door, she paused. Henry, this estate is not just your business. It is home for 37 employees and their families. If this unravels publicly, it is not just your name on the line. She was right. The vineyard workers who had been with us for decades. The cellar team, the tasting room staff, the seasonal crews who returned every harvest because Ashford treated them fairly. Grace had insisted on that. Living wages, health coverage, housing assistance. She said a vineyard was only as good as the hands that tended it. Those hands were now at risk because of mine. Elena left. I sat in the quiet office listening to the old house settle around me. Grace's reading glasses in the drawer. Her handwriting on the reserve labels visible through the window. The mockingbird singing its borrowed melodies from the oak tree. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Napa, area code. The message was 3 lines. Brother, it is time. Oakville grade overlook. 5 this afternoon. Bring nothing but the truth. I stared at the screen. After 65 years of absence, my twin brother had chosen this moment to reach out. Not with reconciliation, not with apology, with a summons. Brother. The word felt foreign and ancient at once, like finding a key to a door you forgot existed. Somewhere between Bakersfield and Napa, between trailer parks and tasting rooms, between sunburned fields and candlelit cellars, a man who shared my blood had decided the silence was over. I typed a single reply. I will be there. Then I set the phone down and looked out at the vineyard. The January sun moved slowly across the dormant vines, warming soil that held 40 years of roots and 65 years of secrets. In a few hours, I would stand on Oakville grade and look into a face I had seen only once, frozen on a phone screen in candlelight. My face, remade by a different life. For 65 years, I had believed I was alone in the world. An only child. An orphan made good. The sole remaining branch of a family tree that began in poverty and ended in premium Cabernet. Now the brother I never knew was calling me to account. And the vineyard I had built my life upon was the very thing he had been denied. The mockingbird fell silent. Even the borrowed songs had run out. The road to Oakville grade climbs through switchbacks, so tight the vineyard rows seemed to pivot beneath you. I had driven it 1,000 times in 40 years. But that afternoon, the road felt longer. Each curve revealed more of the valley floor, and with every foot of elevation, the weight of what waited at the top pressed harder against my chest. I parked just before 5. From this height, you could see everything. The patchwork of vineyards, from Yountville to Calistoga. The silver thread of the Napa River. And there in the middle distance, the stone buildings and ordered rows of Ashford Estate. Looking from above like something permanent, a figure stood at the far edge of the overlook, silhouetted against the dropping sun. Hands in pockets, shoulders slightly forward. Weight shifted to one hip. I knew that posture. I had seen it in mirrors for 73 years. The recognition struck like a physical blow even from 50 feet away. The bone structure was identical. The Dawson jawline, the high cheekbones our mother must have given us both. But time had carved us into different men. He was thinner by 30 pounds, with the wiry hardness of someone who had worked manually every day of his adult life. His skin was dark and rough, textured like old vine bark, and beneath the surface, a yellow tint I recognized from hospital corridors. The color of organs failing quietly. He turned when my boots crunched on gravel. 2 old men on a hilltop, staring at versions of themselves shaped by opposite fortunes. Hello, Henry. His voice was rough, scraped thin by dust and sun, and a body shutting down. William. Saying his name felt like opening a door sealed for decades. He looked me over. My coat. My boots. The watch Grace had given me for our 30th anniversary. "You look like money," he said. "You look sick," I replied, a bitter smile. "Squamous cell. Stage 4. Started on my forearms and kept going. 2 to 4 months. But doctors have been wrong about me my whole life." He tapped the scarred skin of his forearm. "They catch everything too late when you do not have insurance. So this is how you reach out," I said. "After 65 years. By trying to take half my life. Half your life." He let the words sit. Interesting way to describe something that was supposed to be mine too. "I did not know you existed until last night. But the Ashfords knew." His jaw tightened. Robert and Eleanor signed a document promising both Margaret Dawson's sons would share equally. Then they took you, gave you their name, their land, and buried that promise so deep, even you never found it. I had no answer because I suspected he was right. 9 foster homes, he continued. After the Duartes gave me back at 11 because they had a biological son and did not need me anymore. I aged out at 18 with a garbage bag and a GED worth nothing. The anger left his voice. Something heavier replaced it. Exhaustion. The weariness of a man who has told his own story until it wore grooves in his throat. Started picking grapes at 14. San Joaquin Valley. Met Maria at a harvest in Madeira. Most beautiful woman I have ever seen. Hands stained purple from Zinfandel, laughing in the row next to mine. His voice caught on her name. We married in a church smaller than your cellar. Had Rosa a year later. Maria worked the fields with me until a transport van full of workers flipped on Highway 99. Driver fell asleep. No seatbelts. No safety inspection. The farm owner paid a fine and hired a new crew the same week. He looked at me. Rosa was 6. I raised her alone in a trailer on the edge of other men's vineyards. She could see grapevines from her window every morning, and we could not afford a bottle of wine. The valley below was almost entirely in shadow now. Only the hilltops held light. You got the vines, William said quietly. The house. The name. I got sunburn and food stamps and a daughter who dropped out of college to pay my medical bills. Movement caught my eye. A woman stepped from behind a parked truck. Late 20s, dark hair pulled tight, posture deliberate. She walked toward us with the stride of someone who had rehearsed this moment. Rosa, I said. Mr. Ashford. The successful one. She stopped beside William, shoulder nearly touching his arm. Protective. Practiced. She studied me the way an engineer studies a structure, looking for weak points. We are not here for a reunion, she said. We are here for terms. She pulled a folder from her bag. Printed documents, financial projections, appraisal estimates, a litigation timeline. Ashford Estate, 800 acres. Total estimated value, including land, structures, inventory, and brand, $95 million. We claim 50% pursuant to the 1960 adoption agreement. You have 48 hours to sign a voluntary transfer. And if I refuse, we file Monday morning. Every newspaper in wine country runs the story. Your distributors panic. Your brand takes a hit it never recovers from. She paused. And that is before we release the financial documents. This is extortion. This is restitution. The law agrees with us. William spoke then, and his voice carried a weight that made us both turn. I spent my life growing grapes for other men's wine. 65 years with dirt under my fingernails and someone else's name on the bottle. Now I am dying. And the vines that should have been mine are making you rich. He held my gaze. I am not asking for charity, brother. I am asking for what was promised. The word brother hung between us like smoke. Below, Ashford Estates buildings had vanished into shadow. Only the highest vine rows caught light, thin golden lines against the darkening hill. Rosa took William's arm. 48 hours. She guided him toward the truck, her pace steady, his steps uneven. I watched their taillights trace the switchbacks until the valley swallowed them. My twin. A man who had spent his entire life on the wrong side of the vine row. Dying. Angry. Holding a document that said half my world had always been his. 48 hours. To decide whether I would fight for every acre or acknowledge that the soil beneath my feet had been watered by my brother's stolen years. The last light left the hilltops. The valley went dark, and I stood on Oakville Grade, alone between two lives that should never have been separated, wondering which one of us the land truly remembered. By 7 that evening, 4 people sat in my study, and not one of them agreed on what to do next. Maggie occupied Grace's desk, documents fanned before her in the precise formations of a woman preparing for war. Deputy Tom Reeves sat in the leather chair near the fireplace, notebook open, pen moving in short, deliberate strokes. He was Napa County through and through. 50 years old, raised on a cattle ranch in Pope Valley. The kind of law enforcement who understood that in small communities, crime and family often wore the same face. Catherine stood by the bookshelf, arms crossed, jaw set in the rigid line I recognized from every argument she had ever fought and refused to lose. Lily leaned against the window frame, watching the last blue light fade from the vineyard. She had changed into a sweater of Grace's that she kept at the house. And in the dim room, with the firelight catching her profile, she looked so much like her mother that my chest tightened. "Here is what we know," Maggie began. The 1960 adoption agreement contains an inheritance clause, granting equal rights to both biological sons of James and Margaret Dawson. I verified the language with the county clerk this afternoon. The original filing matches the copy planted in Henry's system. The clause was never formally revoked. Meaning what exactly? Catherine asked. Meaning if William Duarte files a civil claim, he has legitimate legal standing, not a guaranteed win, but roughly a 30% chance a judge rules in his favor, particularly given the current political climate around adoption rights and historical inequity. 30%, Catherine said flatly. So 70%. He loses. 70% we survive a trial that becomes the most publicized story in Napa Valley since the judgment of Paris. Every distributor, every restaurant partner, every reserve list member will watch us fight a dying farm worker for land his adoption papers say was promised to him. Maggie let that settle. Even if we win the case, we may lose the brand. Reeves looked up from his notes. From a criminal standpoint, Brett Sullivan committed unauthorized access to proprietary business systems. Rosa Duarte received stolen data and is using it for coercion. Those are actionable charges. I can open an investigation tomorrow, but the civil suit proceeds independently, Maggie added. Arresting Rosa does not make the inheritance clause disappear. She has already prepared the filing. If we arrest her, her attorney submits it the same day and adds a narrative about a powerful landowner persecuting a dying man's family. Silence. The fire crackled. Outside, a barn owl called from somewhere near the equipment shed, its cry thin and solitary in the darkness. Catherine pushed off the bookshelf. We fight, every acre. This estate did not build itself. You and Mom spent 40 years turning Bear Hills into one of the most respected labels in California. That is not something you hand over because a stranger shows up with a 65-year-old piece of paper. He is not a stranger, Lily said quietly from the window. He is Dad's brother. Catherine turned sharply. He is someone we have never met who is using a legal technicality to extort half our inheritance. A legal technicality that says he was promised this land and never received it. Lily's voice remained even. He worked fields his entire life, Catherine. He picked grapes while we sold them. His wife died in a van with no seatbelts because farm labor protections barely exist. His daughter had to drop out of college to keep him alive. And we are sitting in a house worth more than everything he has ever owned. Empathy is not a legal strategy, and litigation is not a family value. The temperature in the room shifted. Catherine's eyes narrowed. Mom would never have given away a single acre of this estate. She bled for this land. Something moved across Lily's face. A flicker of knowledge held back, almost imperceptible. "You do not know what Mom would have done," she said carefully. "None of us do." Catherine flushed. "I knew her better than anyone. You knew the version of her that ran the business. I knew the version that sat in the garden talking to herself about regrets she never explained." The words landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Catherine opened her mouth, closed it. Her reaction was too sharp, too fast, the kind of defensive flinch that comes not from disagreement but from proximity to a secret. I filed it away without comment. 40 years of reading people had taught me to notice when someone was protecting something rather than arguing a point. Reeves cleared his throat. "If I may, you have 48 hours before Rosa files. Whatever you decide about the long game, the immediate question is whether you negotiate or let this go public." "There is a third option," I said. Everyone turned. "I meet William alone. Tonight. Not as adversaries in a legal dispute. As brothers. If there is any chance of resolving this without courtrooms and headlines, it starts with a conversation that Rosa is not controlling." Maggie exhaled. "Henry, meeting a potential litigant without counsel present is legally inadvisable." "Noted. And emotionally risky," Catherine added. "He has spent 65 years building resentment. You cannot fix that in one conversation." "Maybe not. But I can listen." Lily straightened from the window. "Where?" "The old vineyard. West Block. The piece we never replanted after the '85 fire." The room went quiet. Everyone in that study knew what that land meant. It was the original Ashford parcel. The place where Robert and Eleanor had first planted vines in 1952. The place where, according to the adoption records, 2 8-year-old boys had played before being separated. It had burned in the drought fire of '85, and Grace had always said we should leave it wild. "Some ground needs to remember what it lost," she told me once. I pulled out my phone and typed to the number William had messaged from. "The old vineyard. West Block. Tonight. Just us. The place where it all started." The reply came in seconds. "I know the place. I will be there." I pocketed the phone and looked at Catherine and Lily. My daughters. One ready for war. One reaching for peace. Both trying to protect the same thing from opposite directions. "I will be careful," I said. "You will be outnumbered," Maggie corrected. "Even alone. He carries 65 years of ammunition." I stood and walked to the window. The vineyard stretched into darkness, rose invisible now, the land reduced to shapes and shadows. Somewhere in the West Block, burned grapevine roots still gripped the soil, holding on to ground that had forgotten their name. For the first time in 40 years, I was afraid of what the vines might whisper back. The West Block had not been planted since the fire of 1985, 41 years of silence. The soil was dark, almost black, still nourished by the ash of the old Zinfandel rootstock that my father had pressed into this earth in 1952. I parked at the edge of the dirt road and killed the headlights. The valley was ink blue under a January sky, and the only sound was the creek murmuring beneath the south ridge. I carried a lantern and a bottle, the 2001 Reserve Cabernet. The last vintage Grace and I had blended together before her hands began to tremble. William was already there. He sat on the limestone boulder at the center of the clearing, the same boulder my father once used as a grafting bench. His canvas jacket was too thin for the cold. The lantern caught his face, and I felt the same jolt. The Dawson cheekbones, the deep-set eyes, the jawline that mirrored mine like a photograph laid over water. But tonight he looked smaller. The cancer was advancing. I could see it in the way he held his ribs when he breathed. "You picked this spot on purpose," he said. "Dad planted here first. Before the Cabernet Block, before the Chardonnay Hill, Zinfandel. old vine. He brought cuttings from a ranch in Lodi that was being torn down for a shopping mall. Said those vines had survived Prohibition, and he was not going to let them die in a parking lot. William was quiet for a long time. He never told me any of that. I opened the bottle. I had brought 2 glasses wrapped in a cloth napkin. I poured and handed one to him. He held it to the lantern garnet, fading to amber at the rim, the way a great Cabernet ages, losing intensity but gaining depth. Grace did the blending trials, I said. 62% Cabernet Sauvignon, 21 Merlot, 9 Petit Verdot, 8 Cabernet Franc. She said it needed the Franc for perfume. I told her it was already too expensive. She told me to stop counting and start listening. He took a sip and closed his eyes. I watched his throat move and wondered if he had ever tasted a wine that cost more than $12. It is good, he said. It tastes like something that took a long time. 25 years in that bottle. I meant longer than that. We sat without speaking. The creek murmured. An owl called from the oak grove 2 low notes. Then silence. I thought about what Lily had said in the study. He is your brother. He picked grapes his whole life. I thought about what Catherine had said. Do not give away a single acre. Both were right. Both were wrong. The truth was somewhere in the dirt beneath us. William, I need to ask you something honestly. Did Rosa write that ultimatum? Or did you? He did not flinch. She wrote it. I approved it. There is a difference. Not much of one. She is my daughter. She has been fighting for me since she was 6 and learned how to fill out a food stamp application because I could not read the small print without glasses I could not afford. Everything she does because I failed to give her a life where she did not have to fight. The sentence landed in my chest like a stone into still water. I knew that feeling. I had built Ashford Estate for the same reason, so Catherine and Lily would never claw for anything the way I had clawed in the early years. Borrowing at 14%, sleeping in the barn during crush, selling futures on wine that had not yet fermented. The data she took from my system, I said. Harvest projections, client lists, distribution contracts. If that reaches a competitor or a journalist, it does not just hurt me. 37 people work this estate. A woman named Dolores has pruned my vines for 23 years and sends half her paycheck to her mother in Jalisco. They did nothing to you. William looked at his hands. Shadows fell across his knuckles. I told Rosa to leave the employees out of it, but she did not. No, then you do not control this. For the first time I saw something behind his stoicism, fear. Not of me, or the lawsuit, or even the cancer. Fear of his own daughter, of the momentum she had built, of the machine she had become. She has a server, he said quietly. Encrypted. Off-site. If anything happens to her arrest, loss of liberty, anything, it triggers an automatic release. Every file, every contract, every client name. Sent to 6 addresses, 3 journalists, 2 competitors, 1 regulatory body, a dead man's switch. Elena had suspected it. Now I knew. Where is the server? I do not know the location, but I know the architecture. She wrote it on paper. Old habit from Davis. She never trusted digital notes for things that mattered. Brown leather notebook. Small. Fits in a coat pocket. She keeps it in her apartment on Guerrero Street in San Francisco. Hallway closet. Top shelf. Behind a box of her mother's photographs. Why are you telling me this? He drained the last of the wine and set the glass down carefully. The way you set down something you know you will never hold again. Because I have 90 days, maybe less. And when I close my eyes for the last time, I do not want the thing I see to be Dolores losing her paycheck. I came here for land, Henry. Not for blood. The owl called again. I poured the last of the bottle toward his glass. He pushed it back. You drink it. You earned it. Grace earned it. He almost smiled. Then drink it for her. I drank. The tannins had resolved into silk, the fruit faded into earth and tobacco, and something I could only call memory. I thought of Grace at the blending bench, her reading glasses on the tip of her nose. I thought of my father kneeling in this soil, pressing a cutting into the ground with hands that looked exactly like the hands resting on the boulder across from me. I am not giving you 50%, I said. I know, but I am not giving you nothing either. Give me time. Let me find a way that does not destroy what 37 people depend on. And help me reach Rosa, not as an adversary, as an uncle. He stood slowly, steadying himself against the stone. He looked at the empty, clearing the unplanted rows, the dark soil, the ghosts of vines that had survived, prohibition only to die in a fire. Uncle, he repeated, testing the weight of it. She has never had one of those. He extended his hand. His grip was rough and warm, and held on a half-second longer than a handshake. Then he walked to his truck and disappeared down Oakville Grade. I knelt and pressed my palm flat against the soil. The earth was cold, but alive. Somewhere beneath me, the ash of the old Zinfandel was still feeding the ground, still giving. 41 years after the fire, took everything above the surface. I texted Elena. Dead. Man's switch confirmed. Brown leather notebook. Guerrero Street apartment. Hallway closet. Top shelf behind photo box. Architecture on paper. We need it. Her reply came in 11 seconds. Copy. Team briefing at 0600. Do not go alone. I looked at the stars. The Dawson land stretched below me in every direction. Dark, patient, waiting. For the first time since New Year's Eve, I did not feel like a man defending an empire. I felt like a brother deciding what a family owed itself. I did not sleep. I sat in the kitchen with the lantern still warm beside me, and the empty bottle of the 2001 Reserve standing on the counter like a monument to a conversation I was still trying to understand. The house was quiet. Catherine had taken Lily back to her cottage on the North Ridge, and the main house felt the way it always felt after midnight, too large for one man, too full of echoes. At 3 in the morning, I went to Grace's study. I had not changed anything since she died. Her reading glasses sat on the oak desk, beside a ceramic cup of pencils. Her cardigan hung on the back of the chair. Lavender wool, the elbows worn thin. The bookshelves held viticulture journals, French poetry. A first edition of Steinbeck's East of Eden she had found at a yard sale in Salinas for $2. The room smelled faintly of almond and honey, her hand cream, though I knew that was impossible after 4 years. Memory has its own chemistry. I was looking for the 1960 adoption file. Maggie had referenced it during the family meeting. And I remembered Grace keeping a copy in the bottom drawer. Filed under Estate Legal Historical. Grace filed everything. She believed disorder was disrespect toward the future. I found the adoption folder. But beneath it, in a manila envelope with no label, I found something else. A letter. Grace's penmanship, the tall loops, the leftward slant, she never corrected because she said it gave her writing personality. The envelope was sealed. On the front, in blue ink, one word, Henry. The paper was heavy cream stock, the kind she used for personal correspondence. I checked the folder for a date and found a handwritten note clipped inside. Reviewed and filed. The 14th of March, 2021. 5 months before she died. I opened the envelope slowly, the way she used to open letters from wine club members, because she said the anticipation was part of the gift. 3 pages. Henry, I have written this 4 times and torn it up 3. I am writing it again because the doctor told me Tuesday that the treatment is no longer working, and certain truths deserve air before I leave. In the spring of 1993, a woman came to the estate. She arrived on a Wednesday during bud break. You were in Bordeaux, meeting with the Lafitte team. She drove a green sedan with a dented fender and asked for you by name. I told her you were traveling. She asked to wait. I brought her to the kitchen and gave her coffee. Her name was Maria Duarte. She said she was married to a man named William Duarte, your twin brother. Separated from you at age 7 After your parents' divorce and the 1960 adoption, William had spent 30 years looking for you. He worked in the fields, grapes, almonds, stone fruit, and had a daughter named Rosa, 2 years old. He was not looking for money. He wanted to meet his brother. He wanted Rosa to know she had family beyond a trailer park in Bakersfield. Henry, I did not tell you. I told her the estate was under financial pressure, which was true. We were recovering from the '91 frost, and that the timing was not right. I gave her $300 from the household account and asked her to write her address on a napkin. She did. I put it in my jewelry box. I never called. I never wrote. I never told you she came. The honest answer is fear. We had just refinanced at 11%. Catherine was 4. You were working 18-hour days, and I was terrified that any complication would break the thing we had built. I chose the vineyard over the truth. I chose our family over his. I know now this was wrong. Not because the vineyard did not matter, but because William mattered too. He was your blood. Rosa was Catherine and Lily's cousin. Maria drove 4 hours on a Wednesday to ask for something simple. A meeting, a handshake, a recognition that her husband existed. And I sent her away with $300 and a lie. Maria died in 2003. A truck accident on Highway 99. I found out because I searched her name every year on the anniversary of her visit. When I read the obituary, I sat in this room and cried for an hour. Not because I knew her, because I knew what I had taken from her, the chance to give her daughter an uncle, a story that began before the trailer park. Find them, Henry. Find your brother. Not because he deserves the land that is for you and the lawyers to decide, but because he deserves to be found. All my love, all my regret, Grace. I set the letter on the desk and placed my hands flat on the oak surface, the way I had pressed my palm to the soil at the West Block an hour earlier. The room was silent. Grace's cardigan hung on the chair like a witness. Maria Duarte had come to this house 33 years ago. She had sat in my kitchen, drunk my coffee, asked for nothing more than a handshake. My wife, my beloved, brilliant, careful wife, had sent her away. And Maria died 10 years later on a highway, without ever knowing if her husband's brother cared that he existed. I understood now why William's eyes carried a grief I could not name. It was not poverty or illness. It was the silenced decades of it, stretching from a Wednesday in 1993 to a limestone boulder on Oakville Grade, broken only by the death of the one person who had tried to end it. I folded the letter and placed it in my breast pocket, against my chest. Then I called Maggie Tran. She answered on the second ring. Grace knew, I said. She knew about William since '93. She turned away his wife. I have the letter. A long pause. That changes the moral calculus, Henry. I know. It may also change the legal calculus. If the estate had constructive notice of the twins' existence and the adoption clause for over 30 years, I know, Maggie. What do you want to do? I looked at Grace's cardigan. I thought about a green sedan with a dented fender pulling into my driveway on a Wednesday in spring, and a woman with shaking hands holding a cup of coffee that should have been the beginning of everything. I want to do what Grace asked, I said. I want to find my brother. And this time, I am not sending anyone away. The phone rang at 6:14 in the morning. I had been awake for 3 hours, sitting at the kitchen table with Grace's letter in my breast pocket and a cup of coffee I had not touched. The caller was Elena Vega. Turn on your television, she said. Channel 4. Now. The screen filled with an image of the front gate of Ashford Estate, filmed from the road. Morning fog still draped across the vineyard rows. The anchor's expression was different today. She looked like someone delivering a verdict. Napa Valley icon Henry Ashford is at the center of a developing story this morning, involving allegations of a hidden twin brother, contested inheritance claims, and a potential data breach affecting one of California's most prestigious wine estates. Sources confirm that a man named William Duarte, 73, has come forward claiming to be Ashford's biological twin. Separated at age 7, under a 1960 adoption agreement. Duarte is reportedly suffering from stage 4 squamous cell carcinoma and has retained counsel to pursue approximately 50% of the estate, valued at $95 million. Elena's voice was tight. Check the Napa Valley Register website. The headline, Ashford Estate. Rocked by secret twin scandal, dying brother demands half of $95 M empire. Below it, a photograph of William and me, side by side, his from what looked like a county hospital database, mine from the estate website. The article was 1,200 words containing details only someone inside the situation could know: the adoption clause, the 48-hour ultimatum, the data breach. It named Brett Sullivan directly. Rosa leaked this, Elena said. This is leverage. A sympathetic narrative: dying brother denied his birthright by wealthy twin makes it impossible for you to fight without looking like a monster. The journalist had interviewed a neighbor from Williams' trailer park who described him as quiet, hardworking, a man who kept his yard clean and waved to everyone. A former foreman at a San Joaquin almond ranch called him the most reliable picker he had ever employed. The portrait was deliberate, a saint in work boots against a villain in Italian loafers. I did not own Italian loafers. That did not matter. The story was writing itself. By 8 o'clock, I had 47 messages. Wine contacts, restaurant partners, 2 board members of the Vintners Association, a Chronicle reporter, a cable news producer. I answered none. Catherine called twice. I let it ring. Elena arrived at 8:30 with Deputy Reeves and a printed timeline. She spread it across the kitchen table like a field map. The article went live at 5:42. Within 90 minutes, 3 Bay Area outlets, 2 national wine publications, 1 legal blog. The television segment aired at 6:10. Someone created a side-by-side image of you and William shared over 4,000 times. The hashtag #AshfordTwin is trending locally. Reeves leaned against the counter. There is also a safety concern. Someone slashed the tires on your truck last night at the West Block, between midnight and 3 a.m. No cameras on that road. I felt a cold line down my spine. I was at the West Block last night. I know. Given the timing, I am treating it as a threat. Elena pulled up her laptop. At 4:17 this morning, someone tried to access the client database using Brett's credentials again. New protocols blocked it, but the IP traces to San Francisco. Rosa is not waiting for the deadline. 3 fronts. Media exposure to pressure a settlement. Physical intimidation to remind me I was vulnerable. Continued cyber assault to find gaps Elena might have missed. Rosa was not a grieving daughter seeking justice. She was a strategist executing a campaign. Maggie Tran arrived at 9, carrying her briefcase and wearing the expression she reserved for damage control. She opened a legal pad. Option 1. Public statement acknowledging William, expressing compassion, announcing private discussions. Neutralizes the narrative by making you cooperative. Risk confirms the story. Invites deeper investigation. Option 2. Silence. Let the cycle move on. Handle everything through legal channels. Risk silence is interpreted as guilt. The narrative hardens. Option 3. Counter-narrative. Release a statement highlighting the data breach, the extortion, the ultimatum. Reframe the story from rich twin denies dying brother to family targeted by coordinated cybercrime. Risk escalates publicly, may provoke Rosa into triggering the data release. I looked at the 3 options on her pad. Each was a door, and behind each was a different version of the next 6 months. I thought about Grace's letter. I thought about Maria driving a green sedan up this driveway 33 years ago. I thought about William pushing his wine glass toward me on the boulder. I came here for land, not for blood. There is a 4th option, I said. Maggie looked up. I record a video myself. Here, in the vineyard. I tell the truth. All of it. That I have a twin brother I never knew. That my wife knew and kept it secret to protect me. that William is dying, that his daughter has taken actions I cannot condone but can understand, and that I am not fighting him. I am trying to make right what should have been made right 33 years ago. The room was silent. Elena looked at Reeves. Reeves looked at Maggie. "That is either the bravest thing you have ever done," Maggie said, "or the most reckless." Grace would have called it honest. She would have been right. Maggie closed the pad. "But honest does not mean uncontrolled. I write the framework. You speak from the heart, within boundaries. No mention of the dead man's switch, the server, or Elena's investigation. We give them the human story and protect operational details." "Agreed. And Henry, once you do this, there is no retreat. Every competitor, partner, and journalist in the country will know the Ashford name is attached to a scandal. The brand takes a hit no matter how well you speak." I walked to the window. The fog was lifting, and the vineyard rows emerged in lines so precise they looked drawn by hand. 40 years of my life were planted in that soil, but 40 years of William's life had been spent picking someone else's grapes under the same California sun, and no amount of brand management could make that equation balance. "Schedule the recording for this afternoon," I said. "In Block 7, where the old Cabernet vines are. Grace planted those. If I am going to tell the truth, I want to stand where she would have wanted me to stand." Block 7 sat on the eastern slope where the morning sun arrived first and stayed longest. Grace had planted it in 1997, 42 rows of Cabernet Sauvignon on St. George rootstock, spaced 8 feet apart, trained on a vertical chute positioning trellis. She had designed herself after studying photographs of first-growth vineyards in Pauillac. She said the secret was not the soil, or the clone, or the irrigation. The secret was patience. "A vine does not know it is supposed to make great wine," she told me once. "You have to wait for it to figure that out on its own." The vines were dormant now, bare cordons reaching across the wire, like dark hands opened in prayer. January in Napa is a season of absence. No leaves, no fruit, no canopy, and the vineyard looks like what it truly is: a skeleton waiting to be resurrected by spring. I stood at the end of row 14, the row Grace always called her favorite because it caught the last light of the day, and I set up the camera on a tripod Elena had brought from the office. No crew, no makeup, no teleprompter, just a man in a flannel shirt standing in his dead wife's vineyard with the valley behind him and the fog retreating down the hillside like a curtain being pulled. Maggie had written a framework on a single index card. 5 points I was allowed to address. 3 subjects I was forbidden to mention. She stood off camera with Elena and Reeves, her arms crossed, her legal pad clutched against her chest like a shield. I pressed record. "My name is Henry Ashford. I am 73 years old. I have made wine on this land for 40 years, and in that time I have learned that the most important thing a vineyard teaches you is that nothing stays buried forever. Roots push through rock. Water finds cracks. And the truth, no matter how deep you plant it, eventually reaches the surface." I paused. The fog was almost gone. The valley opened below me in rows of green and brown and gold, and somewhere in that landscape 37 families were waking up and wondering if they still had jobs. 3 days ago, on New Year's Eve, I discovered that I have a twin brother. His name is William Duarte. He is 73, the same as me. We were separated when we were 7 years old under an adoption agreement signed by our parents in 1960. I was raised here in Napa by our father. William was placed in foster care and spent his life working in the fields of the Central Valley, picking grapes, picking almonds, picking stone fruit under the same sun that shines on this estate. I did not know he existed. But I have learned that my late wife, Grace, did know. In 1993, William's wife, Maria, drove to this estate and asked to meet me. Grace, out of fear and love and the kind of protective instinct that makes good people do incomplete things, turned her away. Maria died 10 years later. Grace carried the secret until she wrote me a letter 5 months before her own death. I found that letter last night. I held up the envelope. I did not read from it. I let the camera see the single word on the front, Henry in Grace's handwriting, and then I put it back in my pocket. William is dying. He has stage 4 squamous cell carcinoma. His doctors give him 3 months, perhaps less. He has a daughter named Rosa, who loves him the way I love my daughters, fiercely, protectively, and sometimes in ways that cross lines that should not be crossed. I will not discuss the details of those actions today. They are a matter for the law and for private conversation between family members. What I will say is this: William Duarte is my brother. He did not choose to be separated from me. He did not choose the trailer park, or the food stamps, or the fields. He did not choose to lose his wife on Highway 99. And he did not choose to get cancer from the sun that made my fortune. The distance between his life and mine is not a measure of merit. It is a measure of luck. And luck is not something a man should defend as if he earned it. I looked directly into the lens. I thought about what Maggie had told me, speak from the heart within boundaries, and I thought about what Grace had written, find your brother. Not because he deserves the land, but because he deserves to be found. I am not here to announce a legal settlement. I am not here to make promises I cannot keep. I am here to say that I acknowledge my brother. I grieve for the decades we lost. And I am committed to finding a resolution that honors both our lives and the 37 families who depend on this estate. I ask for patience from the public and from my brother. While we work toward that resolution, my wife Grace planted these vines behind me 29 years ago. She believed that the best things take time. I am asking you to believe that too. I pressed stop. The valley was quiet. A red-tailed hawk circled above the ridge, riding a thermal that rose from the warming hillside. Maggie lowered her legal pad. Elena exhaled. Reeves nodded once, the way he nodded when a situation was contained but not resolved. That was good, Maggie said. Clean. Honest. Legally safe. How fast can we post it? Elena checked her phone. I can have it on the estate's website and social channels within an hour. But Henry, once it goes live, Rosa will respond. She will either see this as an olive branch or a provocation. There is no middle ground. Post it. Elena uploaded the video at 2:17 in the afternoon. By 4 o'clock, it had been viewed 62,000 times. By 6, it had crossed 200,000. The comments split roughly in thirds. 1/3 praised me for honesty. 1/3 called me a fraud who had hidden his brother for decades, and 1/3 demanded to know more about the data breach I had carefully avoided mentioning. 3 cable networks requested interviews. 2 newspapers sent reporters to the estate gate. A wine critic I had known for 20 years posted a single sentence. Henry Ashford just did the hardest thing in the wine business. He told the truth before the vintage was finished. But the response I waited for did not come from the public. At 7:43 that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The area code was San Francisco. The message was 4 words. You left out the money. Rosa. I stared at the screen. The 48-hour deadline was 14 hours away. The dead man's switch was still armed. Elena's team had the notebook location, but no plan to retrieve it. And the woman who held every card was watching my vineyard confession from a Fockett apartment on Guerrero Street, unmoved by honesty, counting the hours until the world I had just tried to save came apart at the seams. I typed a reply. 3 words. Let me visit. The cursor blinked for 40 seconds. Then her answer appeared. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Alone. I told Elena at 8 the next morning. She did not take it well. You are walking into the apartment that contains the dead man's switch architecture, alone, at the invitation of the person who built it. That is not a negotiation, Henry. That is a trap. It is also the only chance I have before the deadline. The deadline is in 6 hours. Let me send a team, she said alone. If she sees anyone. The conversation ends, and the switch goes live. Elena pressed her palms flat on the kitchen table, and stared at the oak grain as if a better outcome were written there. Then she pulled a small device from her jacket. Matte black. No larger than a button. GPS tracker. Adhesive. Inside your belt. If you are not out in 90 minutes, I am coming in with Reeves, and I do not care what she thinks. I pressed the tracker against the inside of my belt near the buckle. She held my gaze for 3 seconds, not as a security chief assessing a client, but as a person watching someone she respected walk towards something she could not control. I drove to San Francisco alone. The Golden Gate appeared through fog like a red thread stitching sky to water. I parked 2 blocks from Guerrero Street and walked. Rosa's building was a 3-story Victorian painted dark green with a fire escape zigzagging down the front like a scar. 3rd floor, apartment 3. C. I knocked. She opened the door in a gray sweatshirt and no shoes. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes clear and sharp, and carrying none of the fatigue I expected from a woman running a multi-front campaign on no sleep. She looked like someone who had been waiting a long time for this moment. "You are taller than I imagined," she said. "You are younger." The apartment was small and clean. 2 monitors on a desk, both dark. A bookshelf on the far wall, technical manuals, California water law. A framed photograph of Maria holding a baby in a yellow blanket. Rosa, at 2 or 3 months old. Dark hair, wide smile. A woman who had driven 4 hours for a handshake. "Sit," Rosa said. I sat at the kitchen table, wood, scarred, thrift store kind. She sat across and placed her hands flat on the surface. "Nice video," she said. 200,000 views. People calling you brave. A wine critic compared you to a man finishing a vintage. You said I left out the money. You did, because the money is not the point. She leaned forward. The money is always the point. You built a $95 million estate on land your father stole from my father's future. The adoption agreement guaranteed equal inheritance. Your wife knew for 30 years. You went on camera to tell the world you feel sad about it. Sadness is not restitution. I let her finish. I had learned long ago from Grace, from Maggie, from 40 years of negotiation, that the most powerful thing you can do when someone is telling you the truth is let them finish. "You are right," I said. She blinked. Agreement was not what she expected. The adoption agreement is valid. Maggie confirmed it. Grace's letter proves constructive notice for 30 years. If you file the lawsuit, you have a real chance. Not 50% the court would factor improvements, labor, capital investment, but significant. Maggie estimates 15 to 25 million, depending on the judge. Rosa's fingers pressed harder against the table. "I did not come to fight you," I said. "I came to ask what your father actually wants. He wants what was promised." I asked him the same question on the boulder in the West Block. He said he came for land, not for blood. He told me about the switch, Rosa. He told me where the notebook is. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not fear. Betrayal, the realization that the man she had spent her life protecting had given away her most guarded secret to the person she was fighting. "He should not have done that," she said quietly. "He did it because he is dying and does not want his last act to be the destruction of 37 families who never did anything to him. He did it because he is a better man than either of us deserves." Rosa walked to the window. Guerrero Street was waking below a woman with a stroller, a delivery truck double parked, a cyclist weaving through traffic with coffee in one hand. Ordinary life. Indifferent to what was happening 3 floors above. "What are you proposing?" she said without turning. "A trust. The Dawson Brothers Trust. 20% of the estate's annual net revenue, administered independently, benefiting William for his lifetime and you after that. A permanent advisory board seat. A formal renaming of the West Block as Duarte Vineyard, replanted this spring with Zinfandel, from the same Lodi clone our father used in '52. And a legal, public acknowledgement that William Duarte is a co-heir of the Dawson legacy." She turned. "That is not 50%. No. But it is permanent. A lawsuit gives you a lump sum and a decade of appeals. This gives you a name on the land and income for life. And it gives your father something no court can award: the knowledge that his brother built something with him instead of fighting him. Rosa looked at the photograph of Maria, the baby in the yellow blanket, the wide smile. "I need to talk to my father," she said. "Take the time you need." But Rosa, the switch has to come down, not as a condition, as a gesture. 37 families should not live under a threat while we figure out how to be one. She was quiet for a long time. Then she walked to the hallway closet, reached to the top shelf, and pulled down a brown leather notebook from behind a box of photographs. She held it in both hands the way you hold something that has kept you safe and is about to stop. "I am not giving you this," she said, "but I am turning it off. Tonight, Elena will confirm when the server goes dark. Thank you. Do not thank me. Thank my mother. She would have taken your deal in '93. I stood and extended my hand. She looked at it for 3 seconds, then took it. Her grip was firm and brief, and carried the same half-second hesitation her father's had on the boulder. A family trait written not in documents but in bone and muscle, and the way Duartes say goodbye. I walked into the San Francisco morning. 53 minutes. Elena would not need to come. I sent 2 messages. To Elena. Switch coming down tonight. Stand by for server confirmation. To William. Your daughter is extraordinary. We have a path. Call me when you are ready. His reply came in 9 minutes. I have been ready for 66 years. I drove back to Napa with the windows down. The January air was cold and sharp and tasted like eucalyptus and wet soil. And I needed it against my face, the way a man who has been holding his breath needs the first lungful after surfacing. The Golden Gate disappeared in my rearview mirror, and the vineyards of Sonoma appeared on either side of the highway, bare, dormant, waiting, and I thought about Rosa holding that brown leather notebook in both hands, like a weapon she was choosing not to fire. Elena was waiting in the kitchen when I arrived. She had set up a monitoring station on the table, her laptop, a second screen connected to the estate's security dashboard, and a phone with an encrypted line to a colleague she called only by his first name, Marco, who worked in network forensics somewhere in San Jose. "Tell me everything," she said. I told her. The apartment, the conversation, Rosa's agreement to disable the switch by tonight. Elena listened without interrupting, her eyes moving between me and the dashboard the way a pilot watches instruments during turbulence, constant, practiced, trusting nothing. She said you would confirm when the server goes dark, I said. I will. Marco has been monitoring the external traffic patterns from the IP cluster we traced to the switch. The server pings a verification node every 4 hours. If Rosa disables it, the pings stop. If the pings stop for 2 consecutive cycles, 8 hours, the switch is effectively dead. No signal, no trigger, no release. And if she does not disable it? Elena looked at me. Then the pings continue, and we move to the contingency plan. Reeves coordinates with the FBI field office in San Francisco. They execute a warrant on the Guerrero Street apartment and seize the server hardware. Rosa faces federal charges for unauthorized access, data theft, and extortion. And the files may still be released during the raid window, depending on how fast her dead man's protocol executes. How fast? 11 seconds from trigger to transmission. That is what the architecture would suggest, based on the fragments Marco has reconstructed from the network traffic. 11 seconds to send everything to 6 addresses. We cannot stop that in 11 seconds. The number sat in the room like a held breath. 11 seconds. Less time than it takes to pour a glass of wine. Less time than it takes to say, I am sorry for 66 years. In 11 seconds, every contract, every client name, every financial record of Ashford Estate would scatter across the internet like seeds thrown into wind, and no amount of legal action would ever gather them back. We wait, I said. We waited. Maggie arrived at 4. Catherine arrived at 5. Still angry from the video, but present because she was an Ashford, and Ashfords did not hide from outcomes. Lily came with her, carrying a paper bag from the bakery in street. Helena sourdough rolls and almond cake, because Lily believed that no crisis was made worse by bread. Deputy Reeves called at 5:30 to confirm the FBI team was on standby in San Francisco, positioned 3 blocks from Guerrero Street, ready to move if Elena gave the signal. The first ping cycle passed at 6 p.m. Elena checked the dashboard. The server pinged its verification node at 6:02. Active. Still armed. That is the scheduled cycle, she said. Next one is 10 p.m. If she is going to shut it down, it will happen before then. We ate Lily's bread in silence. Catherine sat by the window with her arms crossed, watching the vineyard darken as the sun dropped behind the Mayacamas. Maggie reviewed legal documents at the far end of the table, her reading glasses reflecting the laptop screen. I sat in Grace's chair, the one with the worn lavender cardigan still draped over the back, and I watched the clock. At 7:15, my phone buzzed. "William." "She called me," he said. His voice was thin, tired, but steady. "She told me about your offer. The trust. The vineyard name. The board seat." "What did she say?" "She said it was not enough." Then she was quiet for a long time. Then she said her mother would have taken it. "And what did you say?" "I told her that her mother was the smartest person I ever knew, and that if Maria would have taken the deal, then the deal was good enough for a dying man who just wants to see his name on a vine before the ground takes him." I closed my eyes. "Did she agree?" "She did not say yes. She said she would think about it. But Henry, she asked me something I did not expect. She asked if you were kind. Not smart, not strategic, not generous. Kind. I told her you brought a bottle of wine to a boulder at sunset and poured me a glass before you poured your own." She was quiet after that. He coughed a deep rattling sound that I could feel in my own chest through the phone. Then he said, "I am tired, brother. Whatever happens tonight, I am glad you answered my message. I am glad you sent it." He hung up. I set the phone on the table. Lily looked at me from across the room. She did not ask what he said. She did not need to. She brought me a piece of almond cake and set it beside my hand and squeezed my shoulder once, the way Grace used to when words were insufficient. At 9:47, Elena straightened in her chair. "Marco," she said into the encrypted phone. "Are you seeing this?" I could not hear Marco's reply, but I could see Elena's face, and her face told me everything. Her eyes widened. Her jaw unclenched. She exhaled through her nose the way a diver exhales when the ascent is complete and the air is real. "The verification ping at the 10 p.m. cycle just failed," she said. The server did not respond. Checking secondary nodes. She typed rapidly, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the precision of someone who had spent her career waiting for exactly this kind of silence. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Secondary nodes are dark. Tertiary backup dark. The entire ping architecture has gone offline. She looked up at me. She did it. The switch is dead. The room exhaled. Catherine uncrossed her arms. Maggie removed her glasses and pressed her fingers against her closed eyes. Lily put her hand over her mouth. Reeves, still on the phone, relayed the information to the FBI team. "Stand down. No raid required." Server deactivated by the subject voluntarily. I stood and walked to the window. The vineyard was black under a moonless sky. Somewhere in San Francisco, Rosa Duarte was sitting in a small apartment on Guerrero Street, having just dismantled the only leverage she had, not because she lost, not because she was forced, but because a dying man told her that a stranger who poured wine before himself might be kind. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. San Francisco area code. "It is off. Do not make me regret this." I typed back, "You will not." Then I sent one more message. To William. "The switch is down. Your daughter chose trust over war. She is more like her mother than she knows." His reply took 4 minutes this time. Slower. The cancer was taking his speed, his breath, his hours. But the words were clear. Maria always said the hardest thing is not fighting. The hardest thing is stopping. 3 days passed before Rosa called. Not texted, called. Her voice was different than it had been in the apartment. Quieter. The edges filed down, not by defeat but by something I recognized. The exhaustion that comes after you stop running and realize you have to build something in the place where you stopped. I have conditions, she said. I am listening. The trust goes to 22%. Not 20. 2 additional points for a scholarship fund for agricultural workers' children in the Central Valley. Named after my mother. The Maria Duarte Scholarship. I did not hesitate. Done. The advisory board seat is permanent and hereditary. If I have children, it passes to them. The Duarte name stays on the board as long as the estate exists. Done. The replanting of the West Block. I choose the nursery. I choose the rootstock. And I am there on planting day. Not as a guest. As family. The word landed in my chest the way certain words do when you have been waiting to hear them without knowing you were waiting. A woman who 3 days ago held a dead man's switch in both hands was asking to plant vines beside me and be called family. Done. All of it. One more thing. The signing happens at the West Block. On the boulder. Not in a law office. On the rock where you and my father drank wine and decided to stop being strangers. Saturday, I said. 10 in the morning. Before she hung up, she said something so quiet I almost missed it. My father smiled today. First time in weeks. He said he dreamed about the Zinfandel. The line went dead. I sat with the phone in my hand and thought about an old man in a Bakersfield hospital bed dreaming about vines he had never seen. Rooted in soil he had never touched, carrying a name he had carried alone for 66 years. Saturday arrived cold and clear. A glass morning, every vine, every fence post, every oak on the ridge, standing in perfect definition against a sky so blue it looked painted. Maggie came first with a leather portfolio containing the trust documents. 47 pages drafted over 72 hours, with input from Rosa's attorney, Diane Pock, an Oakland specialist in agricultural inheritance law. They had argued over 11 clauses, compromised on 9, agreed to revisit 2 after 6 months. Maggie said it was the most unusual trust she had ever drafted, and the most fair. Catherine drove her pickup along the dirt road with Lily beside her. She had not spoken to me since the video 3 days of silence from a woman who had inherited her mother's stubbornness and her father's pride. But she came. She parked and walked to the boulder with her hands in her coat pockets, and her jaw set in a line I knew meant she was holding back something larger than anger. Elena arrived with Reeves. No equipment, no laptop. Just herself. Standing at the perimeter the way she always stood. Watchful. Quiet. Ready. Then William came. Rosa drove him in a rented sedan, dark blue, pulling slowly up the dirt road. She opened the passenger door and helped him stand. He was thinner than on the overlook. The cancer showed in the hollows of his cheeks and the careful placement of each foot. He wore a clean white shirt buttoned to the collar and dark trousers that hung loose. His shoes were polished. He had dressed for this the way a man dresses, for a ceremony he knows he will not repeat. Rosa walked him to the boulder. He sat where he had sat the night we shared the reserve, and he looked at the empty vineyard, the dark soil, the unplanted rows, the space where Zinfandel would grow again in spring. This is a good place to sign something, he said. Maggie opened the portfolio on the limestone. She explained each section: revenue allocation, scholarship fund, board seat, replanting clause, co-heir acknowledgement, and Rosa and I initialed every page. When Maggie placed the pen for final signatures, I signed first. Henry James Ashford. The ink was black and steady, and I thought about my father signing the 1960 adoption agreement at a table I had never seen, making a decision that echoed for 6 decades through 2 lives that should have been 1. Rosa signed second. Rosa Maria Duarte. She wrote her mother's name in the middle, and when the pen lifted, she looked at the photograph taped inside her legal folder. Maria. Dark hair, wide smile, baby in a yellow blanket, and nodded once, as if confirming a promise made to someone who could no longer hear it. William did not sign. The trust did not require his signature beneficiary, not grantor. But when the portfolio closed, he placed his hand on top of it and held it there, the way you place your hand on a headstone or a newborn or anything that marks the boundary between what was and what will be. "I want to see the soil," he said. Rosa helped him stand. I walked beside him to the center of the clearing, the exact spot where the original Zinfandel had grown. He knelt slowly, one knee then the other, and pressed both palms flat against the earth. His fingers dug into the dark soil and held it a fistful of Dawson land, the first he had ever touched. "It is warm," he said. "January sun. The slope faces east, catches the first light." Our father knew what he was doing. He did. He opened his hands and let the soil fall back. Rosa knelt beside him and brushed the dirt from his palms with a tenderness I had seen only once before, Grace cleaning soil from my hands after harvest, her fingers gentle and sure, and belonging to someone who understood that the dirt was not something to remove, but something to honor. Catherine stepped forward. She had not spoken all morning. She stood at the edge of the clearing with her hands in her pockets, and for a moment I thought she would turn and leave. She did not. She walked to William and extended her hand. "I am Catherine, Henry's daughter. I do not know how to do this, but I am here." William took her hand and held it. "That is enough," he said. "Being here is enough." Lily was already crying. She did not hide it. She knelt beside William on the soil and put her arms around him, and he let her. And for a moment the West Block held something it had not held in 41 years' life. Rosa chose the nursery herself. A small operation in Lodi run by a third-generation Italian family named Benedetti, who had been propagating old vine Zinfandel since 1947. She selected St. George rootstock, the same variety my father used in '52, and a clone Carlo Benedetti, said descended directly from the original Lodi plantings that survived Prohibition, never grafted onto modern commercial stock. "The old blood," Carlo called it. Rosa phoned me from the parking lot, her voice carrying something I had not heard before: excitement. Not the sharp energy she brought to negotiations. Something younger, less guarded. "Carlo says the cuttings will be ready in 3 weeks. 240 plants. Enough for the full West Block, 42 rows, 6 per row. He said the rootstock is so strong it will establish in 1 season. That is fast." He said old blood does not hesitate. I wrote the phrase on paper and pinned it to the kitchen corkboard, next to Grace's harvest calendar and a photograph of my father kneeling in the same soil we were about to plant. The cuttings arrived on a Tuesday in late February. Carlo delivered them in a refrigerated van, each wrapped in damp burlap with a handwritten tag. Rosa counted every one. 240 exactly. She wore work boots and a canvas jacket that looked new, purchased, I suspected, for this occasion. William came that afternoon. Rosa drove him from the hospice in Napa, where he had been staying since the signing, paid for by the trust's first disbursement. His weight had dropped. The white shirt from the ceremony hung on him like a sail on a windless day. But his eyes were clear. He reached for the nearest cutting and held it to the light filtering through the barn slats. "Same clone?" he asked. "Same blood," Rosa said. Carlo traced it to the original vineyard. William ran his thumb over the dormant buds the way a man reads Braille, not looking, just feeling something that contained an entire future in a space smaller than a fingernail. "Your grandfather saved these from a parking lot," I said. "Now his granddaughter is bringing them home." He looked at Rosa. She looked at the ground. I saw her throat move once. Then she picked up a cutting and held it beside her father's 2 dark sticks, parallel in the barnlight, like hands reaching for the same sky. Planting day was the first Saturday of March. 58 degrees. Clear. A light wind, carrying wild mustard from Block 7. 31 people came, every employee, not on essential duty. Dolores arrived first at 7, wearing pruning gloves and the wide-brimmed hat she had owned for 20 years. She walked to William. took his hand, and said, "I have pruned this land for 23 years. It is good that it finally knows your name." He held her hand and said nothing, because some things are better honored by silence. Catherine came with shovels. 12. Loaded in her pickup, borrowed from the equipment shed, without telling me. She leaned them against the limestone boulder in a row, handles up, blades sinking into the soft soil. When I looked at her, she shrugged one shoulder. A gesture so small and loaded that I understood it contained everything she could not yet say. Forgiveness was coming. It was taking the scenic route. Lily organized the teams. 6 per row, one cutting every 8 feet, each hole 12 inches deep, and backfilled with compost and native soil Rosa had specified from a UC Davis extension formula. Lily moved between the rows with a clipboard and marking tape, humming a song I did not recognize. But that sounded like something Grace would have loved. Rosa planted the first vine. She knelt at the head of row 1, the eastern edge, where morning sun arrives first, and dug the hole with bare hands. No shovel, no gloves. She placed the cutting upright, pressed soil firm, and poured water from a jar Carlo had blessed. I did not ask what that meant. Some rituals do not require explanation. William planted the second vine. Rosa helped him kneel. His hands shook as he held the cutting, and the hole Catherine had dug was shallow because his arms could no longer push deep, but he placed the vine and covered it. And when he pressed soil with both palms, his lips moved a prayer, or a name, or a word too private for the wind. He stayed kneeling, hands flat, eyes closed, face turned toward the sun that had given him cancer, and was now warming the soil where his name would grow. I planted the third beside his. I did not speak. I knelt next to my brother and pushed a Zinfandel cutting into Dawson land, and felt, for the first time in 66 years, that the earth beneath us was whole. By noon, all 240 vines were in the ground. The west block was no longer empty. A hand-painted sign Rosa had commissioned from a woodworker in Street Helena stood at the entrance. Duarte Vineyard, Est, 2026. Old blood. New roots. Dolores tied a yellow ribbon around the post, the same shade as the blanket in Maria's photograph. No one told her to. No one needed to. We ate lunch on the boulder. Bread from Street Helena, cheese from Sonoma, olives from Lake County, and the 2019 Estate Cabernet poured into paper cups because Lily said crystal was for people who had forgotten what mattered. William drank half a cup and fell asleep in a folding chair Rosa had placed in the sun. His breathing was shallow and slow, and the light fell across his face, the way it fell across the vineyard evenly, without judgment, giving warmth to everything it touched. I sat beside him and watched the new vines. 240 sticks, none taller than a ruler, none carrying a single leaf. To anyone passing on the road, they would have looked like nothing, but I knew what they were. They were the answer to a question my father asked in 1952 when he pressed the first cutting into this earth. What will this land remember? It would remember both of us. William moved into the main house on the second week of March. It was Rosa's idea, though she presented it as a medical decision. The hospice was 20 minutes from the estate, and his condition was changing fast enough that 20 minutes could matter. But I knew the real reason. She wanted him to wake up where the vines were. She wanted the last thing he saw each morning to be the land that finally carried his name. I gave him the room at the end of the hallway on the ground floor. It had been a guest room for 30 years, neutral walls, a quilt Grace had chosen, a window that faced east toward the Chardonnay Hill. Rosa brought his things in 2 trips, a duffel bag of clothes, a box of books, a framed photograph of Maria, and a small clay pot with a sprig of rosemary. She said her mother had grown on the windowsill of every home they ever rented. She placed the rosemary on the nightstand and the photograph beside it, and the room stopped being a guest room and became William's room. The first week was good. He walked the vineyard each morning with Rosa, slowly, leaning on her arm, stopping every few rows to rest on the folding chair Lily had stationed at intervals along the path like a trail of kindness. He studied the new Zinfandel cuttings in the West Block Duarte vineyard and noted which ones were showing the earliest signs of bud break. He kept a small notebook in his shirt pocket and recorded each observation in handwriting that grew shakier by the day, but never stopped. Number 14 is first, he told me one evening at dinner. Row 3. Sixth vine from the east. 2 buds swelling. By next week, it will leaf out. How do you know? Because that is the vine I planted. And I told it to hurry. Lily laughed. Catherine almost did. Rosa looked at her plate and pressed her lips together in the way people do when they are holding something inside that is too large to release in company. The second week was harder. William's appetite disappeared. He ate half portions, then quarter portions, then nothing but broth and bread that Lily brought to his room on a tray with a small vase of wildflowers she picked from the creek bank each morning. His skin thinned and yellowed. The squamous cell carcinoma was metastasizing. The hospice nurse, who visited every second day, told me privately that the cancer had reached his liver. She estimated 2 to 4 weeks. I did not tell William the timeline. He already knew. Dying men always know. They do not need a number, they read it in the weight of their own bones. In the distance between the bed and the door that grows longer each morning, in the way people begin to speak to them in softer voices, as if volume itself could cause harm. But he kept walking. Every morning, slower, shorter distances, the folding chairs closer together now, because Rosa had moved them overnight without telling anyone. He reached the West Block on the morning of March 21st, the spring equinox, and stood at the entrance beneath the Duarte Vineyard sign with one hand on Rosa's shoulder and the other pressed against the wooden post. "They are leafing out," he said. He was right. Along row 3, the earliest buds had opened into small, pale green leaves, no larger than a thumbnail. The vine he had planted, number 14, had 3 leaves already, furled tight like fists that were slowly learning to open. The old blood was doing what Carlo Benedetti promised. It was not hesitating. William knelt. Rosa tried to stop him. His knees were swollen, his balance unreliable, but he waved her off with a gentle motion and lowered himself to the soil. He placed his hands around the base of vine 14, the way you cup your hands around a candle flame in wind. Not to own it, but to protect it from what might come. "You are going to make wine from this," he said. Not a question. Yes. How long until the first harvest? 3 years for the first fruit. 5 before the vines are mature enough for a reserve bottling. He looked up at me. The sun was behind my head, and he squinted, and for a moment his face was my face. The Dawson cheekbones, the deep-set eyes, the jawline but lit from within by something the cancer had not yet taken. "Purpose. I want you to name the first vintage after our father," he said. "James Dawson. Not Ashford. Not Duarte. Dawson. The name before the names. I will. And I want Rosa to make the blending decisions. Not because she is a winemaker, she is not. Not yet, but because she has her mother's instinct. Maria could taste a strawberry and tell you which field it came from. Rosa has that. She just has not had the chance to use it." Rosa was crying. She did not wipe her eyes. She stood behind her father with her hands at her sides and let the tears run, because some grief is not meant to be managed, only witnessed. That evening I sat with William on the porch. The valley was turning gold in the late light, and the air smelled like soil and green growth and the distant sweetness of mustard flowers closing for the night. He was wrapped in a blanket. Lily had brought wool. Heavy, the color of dark honey. "I have a question," he said. "Ask. When I am gone, will you take care of her?" I did not ask who he meant. Yes, not as a project, not as a debt, as a father. The word arrived like a stone thrown into still water. I had 2 daughters. He was asking me to carry a third. A woman who had built a dead man's switch and negotiated like a general and cried without wiping her eyes when her father asked a vine to hurry. "As a father," I said. He nodded. He closed his eyes. The blanket rose and fell with his breathing, each cycle a little shallower than the last, and I sat beside him in the darkening valley and listened to the sound of a man running out of air in a place that had more of it than anywhere on earth. The next morning, Vine 14 opened its fourth leaf. William died on a Thursday, April 3rd. The morning was warm and still, the kind of spring morning that arrives in Napa like a held breath, no wind, no fog, just light pouring across the valley floor in a slow, golden tide that touched everything equally. The Zinfandel in Duarte Vineyard had reached its sixth leaf on most vines. Vine 14 had 8. I was in the kitchen making coffee when Rosa appeared in the doorway. Her eyes were dry, but her face carried a stillness I had never seen on her before. Not calm, not grief, but the absence of everything except presence. She looked like a woman who had been emptied and was waiting to learn what would fill the space. "He is gone," she said. I set down the coffee pot. I walked past her, down the hallway, to his room. The door was open. The east window was open too. Rosa must have opened it during the night, because the room was cool and smelled of rosemary from the plant on the nightstand and the faint green sweetness of the vineyard waking up outside. William lay on his back with his hands at his sides, palms up, the way you lay your hands when you have finally released everything they were holding. His face was smooth. The pain that had tightened his jaw for weeks was gone. He looked, for the first time since I had known him, like a man at rest. Maria's photograph stood on the nightstand beside the rosemary. Dark hair, wide smile, baby in a yellow blanket. I wondered if his last sight had been her face, or the vineyard through the window, or the ceiling of a room in a house he had entered only 3 weeks ago. I hoped it was the vineyard. I hoped the last thing his eyes held was the land that carried his name. Rosa stood behind me. I turned and looked at her, and I did not know what to say, because no arrangement of words in any language has ever been adequate for the moment when a daughter loses her father. So I did what William had asked me to do. I opened my arms, and she stepped into them. And I held her the way a father holds a child who has just learned that the world is capable of taking everything. She did not cry. Not then. She pressed her forehead against my shoulder and breathed long, slow breaths that I could feel moving through her body like waves, and I stood still and let her take whatever time the moment required. The rosemary stirred in the breeze from the open window. Somewhere outside, a mockingbird sang 3 notes and stopped, as if it too understood that silence was more appropriate. Catherine arrived within the hour. She walked into the room and stood at the foot of the bed and looked at William for a long time. She had met him 5 weeks ago. She had shaken his hand at the boulder and said, now she was looking at a man she would never know beyond those 5 weeks, and I could see in her face the weight of the years she had missed, not her fault, not anyone's fault still living, but heavy nonetheless. "He looks like you," she said. "He always did." She reached down and straightened the blanket across his chest. The dark honey wool Lily had brought, and the gesture was so small and so maternal that I understood Catherine had forgiven me, not with words, not with a declaration, but with the instinct to care for someone who belonged to her father and therefore belonged to her. Lily arrived and brought flowers. White roses from the garden Grace had planted along the south wall of the house. She placed them on the nightstand beside Maria's photograph and the rosemary, and the 3 objects sat together like a sentence. Love, memory, continuity. The hospice nurse came at 10 and confirmed what we already knew. She was gentle and efficient, and she touched William's hand once before she left. A gesture that told me she had done this many times and it never got easier. Maggie called at 11. I told her. She was quiet for 15 seconds, a long time for Maggie. And then she said, "The trust is structured to continue. Rosa becomes the primary beneficiary effective immediately. The scholarship fund activates on the first disbursement cycle in July. Everything William wanted is in place. Thank you, Maggie. Do not thank me. Thank the man who walked into his brother's vineyard and had the courage to kneel." Elena sent a single message. "I am sorry, Henry." He was brave. Reeves called and offered to handle any procedural requirements. I thanked him and hung up and sat in Grace's chair in her study and looked at the cardigan on the back and the pencils in the ceramic cup and the first edition of East of Eden on the shelf, and I thought about how many kinds of loss a single house can hold. The funeral was the following Monday. Small, private, held at the West Block because Rosa said her father would not have wanted a church. She was right. William Duarte was a man of soil, not steeple. The people who came were the people who mattered. Catherine, Lily, Elena, Reeves, Maggie, Dolores, Carlo Benedetti, who drove from Lodi with a Zinfandel cutting wrapped in black ribbon, and 11 estate workers who had known William for only 5 weeks, but carried his memory as if it were decades. Pastor Coleman from Street Helena spoke briefly. He read from Ecclesiastes, a time to plant and a time to uproot, and then he closed the book and said, "William Duarte spent his life planting for others. Today, we plant for him." Rosa spoke last. She stood beside Vine 14 with her hands clasped and her voice steady, and she said only this: "My father was not a wealthy man. He was not a famous man. He worked in the sun his whole life, and the sun took him. But before it did, he stood on this soil and pressed his hands into the earth and felt it warm. He said, 'It is warm.' And his brother said, 'January sun, that is enough.' That is the whole story." She placed Maria's rosemary plant at the base of Vine 14. The small clay pot settled into the dark soil as if it had been waiting for it. The yellow ribbon Dolores had tied to the vineyard sign fluttered once in the breeze and then hung still. I did not speak at the funeral. I had said everything I needed to say to William on the porch, in the barn, on the boulder, in the dark at the West Block, with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, and an owl calling from the ridge. The words between brothers are not meant for audiences. They are meant for the soil and the stars, and the silence between 2 heartbeats that once shared a womb. That night I walked to Duarte Vineyard alone. The vines were silver in the moonlight, their young leaves trembling in a breeze I could not feel. I knelt at Vine 14 and placed my palm on the soil the way William had, the way my father had, the way every Dawson who had ever touched this earth had done when they wanted to say something the mouth could not. The ground was warm. April sun, stored from the afternoon, radiating back into the night. "Rest now, brother," I said. "The vines will do the remembering." Summer came the way it always comes to Napa, slowly. Then all at once, the fog retreating a little further each morning, until one day in June it simply did not arrive, and the valley stood naked under a sky so wide and blue, it made you understand why the Wapo people had chosen this land before anyone else thought to claim it. The vines in Duarte Vineyard grew as if they had been waiting centuries to be planted. By July, the Zinfandel had pushed past its first wire, the leaves broad and green and catching the light like open palms. Vine 14 led the block, as it had from the beginning, its canopy already dense enough to cast a shadow on the soil where William had knelt. Rosa stayed. I did not ask her to. She did not announce a decision. She simply never left. After the funeral, she moved her things from the Guerrero Street apartment to the cottage on the North Ridge that Catherine had vacated. Catherine and Lily had moved back into the main house, a transition so quiet and natural that no one remarked on it, the way tides do not announce themselves but simply arrive. Rosa converted the cottage's second bedroom into a study. Technical manuals on viticulture lined one wall. California water law lined the other. On the desk, beside her laptop, she kept Maria's photograph and a small glass jar of Ashford soil she had collected on planting day. She walked the vineyard every morning the way her father had, slowly, notebook in hand, recording bud counts and leaf measurements and the slow arithmetic of growth that only patience can calculate. She enrolled in the UC Davis Extension program for enology in May, attending lectures twice a week in a classroom filled with students half her age, and she returned each evening with questions that Grace would have loved about malolactic fermentation, about tannin structure, about the way a vine communicates stress through the color of its leaves before any instrument can detect it. Your mother had that instinct, I told her one evening on the porch. William said Maria could taste a strawberry and tell you which field it came from. Rosa looked at the vineyard. I do not have her palate yet, but I am learning to listen. The Maria Duarte Scholarship awarded its first grants in July, as Maggie had structured. 4 recipients. Children of agricultural workers in the San Joaquin Valley, each receiving tuition and living expenses for 2 years at a California State University. Rosa reviewed every application herself. She selected a 17-year-old girl from Bakersfield named Lucia Herrera, whose mother picked almonds on the same ranch where William had worked. When Rosa called Lucia to deliver the news, she stayed on the phone for 40 minutes. I did not hear the conversation. I did not need to. I heard Rosa laughing at the end of it, and that was enough. Brett Sullivan's case resolved in August. Maggie negotiated a civil settlement. Brett relinquished all claims to Ashford estate assets, repaid the consulting fees Rosa had paid him, and signed a non-disclosure agreement covering the family's internal affairs. Catherine filed for divorce the same week. She did not discuss it with me. She handled it the way she handled everything, since the signing, with precision, without sentiment, and with the quiet understanding that some structures cannot be repaired and are better dismantled cleanly. Brett left Napa. I did not ask where he went. Some departures do not require a forwarding address. Elena Vega stayed on as head of estate security, a position I formalized with a title and a salary that reflected what she had actually done, not merely protected a database, but held a family together during the weeks when the family did not know it needed holding. She and Rosa developed an unlikely friendship built on mutual respect and a shared preference for solving problems at 5 in the morning before anyone else was awake. I found them once in the kitchen at dawn, laptops open, coffee between them, arguing about encryption protocols with the intensity of 2 people who had found in each other the rarest thing an equal. Deputy Reeves retired in September. He came to the estate on his last day in uniform and shook my hand and said, "Henry, in 32 years of law enforcement, this is the only case I closed where nobody went to prison and everybody went home." I gave him a bottle of the 2019 Estate Cabernet. He said he would open it on his birthday. I suspect he opened it that night. The first frost came in November. I woke before dawn and walked to Duarte Vineyard in the dark. The air was sharp, and the soil crunched beneath my boots, and the vines stood bare again, their leaves fallen, their cordons dark against the wire. The cycle had completed, 8 months from cutting to canopy to dormancy, and the roots invisible, silent, deeper than anyone could see, were storing sugar for the spring. I stood at vine 14. The rosemary Rosa had planted at its base was still green, still fragrant, still alive despite the frost. Tough plant, rosemary. Maria's plant. It had survived everything its owner could not. I thought about the year that had passed. A video on a phone. A face that was my face. A letter sealed in a desk drawer. A woman in a green sedan who came to my door and was turned away. A brother who knelt in the soil and said it was warm. A daughter who held a weapon in both hands and chose to set it down. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a label. Rosa had designed it herself, clean, simple, black ink on cream paper. It read, Dawson, Duarte Vineyard, Zinfandel Ashford Estate, Napa Valley. The name before the names. The first vintage was still 3 years away. But the label was ready, because Rosa said a vine needs to know what it is growing toward. I did not argue. I had spent 73 years not knowing what I was growing toward, and I did not recommend it. I knelt and pressed the label against the soil at the base of vine 14, beside the rosemary. And I held it there for a moment the way William had held the trust document on the boulder, not to claim it, but to mark the boundary between what was and what would be. The sun came up. It arrived over the eastern ridge the way it had arrived every morning for 10,000 years, indifferent to names, to claims, to the wars that men wage over dirt they will eventually become. It touched the vineyard in rows of gold, vine by vine, wire by wire, until the whole block was lit, and I could see what my father had seen in 1952, what William had seen on the equinox, what Rosa would see every morning for the rest of her life. Land does not belong to people. People belong to land. And the land remembers everything, every root, every fire, every hand that ever pressed into its surface and asked it to hold something sacred. It holds it all. It holds it forever. It does not care who you are. It only cares that you came. I stood. I brushed the soil from my knees. I walked back to the house where my daughters were waking. 3 of them now. Catherine and Lily and Rosa and I put coffee on the stove and set 4 cups on the table and waited for the sound of their footsteps on the stairs. The valley filled with light. The vines stood patient in the cold. And somewhere beneath the soil of Duarte Vineyard, in the dark where no one could see, the old blood was already reaching for spring.